Well, it's good to see everyone here today. I want to thank all members of the media who are busy working today. I want to thank my colleagues from both the Senate and Assembly, some of whom you will hear from. I'm joined by, of course, my colleague, Assembly Republican Leader Will Barclay. I'm also joined by our housing ranker, Senator and Conference Chair, Senator Pam Helming, Senator Tom O'Mara, Senator George Borrello, Senator Steve Rhodes, and we're also joined by Assemblywoman Mary Beth Walsh. Did I miss anybody? Oh, and I'm sorry, and my colleague, Senator Dean Murray, who is also here today. Of course, today there is, at least I think in the Assembly and the Senate, there's no scheduled session, but we thought it was important to address some broader budgetary issues that have been reported, that have been out there, but specifically, I know we wanted to talk about the housing issue and the housing deal that has been reported. Obviously, nothing is final until it is, but we know we've heard the governor, we've heard our colleagues across the aisle, and even everyone up here has talked about affordability in the state of New York, and specifically the housing crisis, the lack of affordable housing, not government subsidized housing, but housing that is affordable for people, whether you're in New York City looking for an apartment or whether you live upstate and you're looking to buy that first home. We know that there is a real crunch on availability, and of course that has driven up prices and has put, where I live, it has put home ownership further out of reach from a lot of first-time would-be homeowners. And the reason I think that is so problematic is in a larger philosophical sense is that when you talk about the American dream, for most people, what is that? I will tell you that is home ownership. That is owning your own home, or at least the possibility of owning your own home. And if that becomes further and further out of reach, that means the American dream becomes further and further out of reach for a new generation of Americans, and that is a bad thing. That means New York State is becoming less affordable, and it's another reason. Forget employment opportunities, forget, keeping more money in your pocket from overburdened taxes, forget the weather. That is another issue. If you don't think you can find access to an affordable home, then you're going to find that elsewhere in other states where it may be more affordable. And the deal that has been put on the table addresses new construction, or it incentivizes new construction, 421A extender. Obviously, there's a negotiation going on between the trades, between some real estate interests. To my knowledge, that has not materialized in an actual agreement, but obviously those negotiations are ongoing. But look, there's no question we have to incentivize new construction across the state of New York. In New York City, yes. And that's where 421A tax incentives come in to get developers to build the most expensive housing on the most expensive real estate in the world, certainly in the country. In order to do that, if you want them to charge below market rate, you have to provide some kind of incentive to make that happen. For a long time we did that, and for a long time we did not have this kind of crisis. That expired, it was allowed to expire. It was attacked as a giveaway to wealthy developers by those on the far left, including some members in the New York State Senate and, of course, the New York State Assembly. But as a result, those developers also were building apartments and condos and co-ops for people. They were putting a roof over someone's head. That 421A needs to happen. That extension needs to happen. We need to incentivize construction in the city of New York. However, the deal that's been put on the table or that's been reported, there's nothing to incentivize new construction in any other part of the state. Upstate, Western New York, Central New York, the North Country, Long Island, Hudson Valley, nothing. But what is, of course, in there for the whole state is essentially good cause. Automatic lease renewals, which is essentially tenancy for life. And good cause is nothing more than a direct attack on private property rights in this state. And that is the case because some of my colleagues simply do not believe in private property rights. They have actually said that you should not own any home except the one you live in. That is an actual quote from a New York State senator on the Democratic conference. This is a fundamental divide, but it is going to have a negative impact across the state of New York, certainly where I live and where most of us live and represent. You are going to collapse in some cases the rental market, the rental model. You're going to have landlords who are going to sell, small, medium-sized landlords who own, 20 units or 10 units or 4 units. They're going to sell. They're going to get out. What bank is going to want to continue? All these values, the loans, are based off of pre-good cause eviction. This is going to absolutely have a negative impact on those property values all day long. So they're going to sell. You know, they're going to sell to. They're going to sell to out-of-state and out-of-country interests. That's what's going to happen. So you have a leaky faucet. Here's a 1-800 number. You have a problem with the toilet. You have a problem with the tenant next door. Here's a 1-800 number. Call, leave a message, and maybe somebody will get to it. Now, maybe people in New York City are used to that, but I can tell you where I live, they are not used to that. And so this deal, this housing deal, does nothing for Western New York, for upstate New York, for most of New York. It actually doubles down on the very reasons where we are. And what's most disappointing to me is that we have a governor from Western New York. She's supposed to be in that room carrying the water, carrying the interests of the whole state, not just New York City, not just Mayor Adams. I know he's looking for a friend, and she's definitely been one, but she needs to be carrying the water and the interest and standing up for homeowners, would-be homeowners, for affordable housing across the state of New York. And she's not doing that. The only discussions in this room are solutions that affect and are generated by New York City. Good Cause is a New York City creation. There is no one outside of that would have ever come up, or this would never gain any real traction. Obviously, 421A is a New York City solution. It specifically impacts New York City housing construction. And again, we should get New York more housing construction in the city. Mayor Adams is right to call for that. But who is standing up for new construction of homes, as well as maybe rental units in the rest of the state? This deal does nothing for that, but it does apply, obviously, the good cause provisions, automatic lease renewals, tenancy for life provisions across the state of New York. And that will be a disaster for affordability and for housing here in the state. And now to talk certainly about, I think about that, about affordability in general, and sort of what this means for the whole budget, is my colleague, my friend, Assembly Republican Leader Will Barkley.
Thank you very much, Leader Orr, and thanks for my colleagues for being here, and thanks to all those members of the media that are here today. As you know, I think everybody in this room knows, April 1st was the budget deadline, and I've been around this place long enough to remember when the Republicans were involved, missing that deadline, people were running around with their hair on fire. Late budget, and New York got to be known as a state that had late budgets. Now what do I hear? We have an extended deadline. We don't hear late budget anymore. We hear extended deadline. Delayed budget. That was another one I heard. We have a delayed budget. No, it isn't. It's April 10th. We have a late budget. Now, the other thing I used to hear a lot was this terrible thing about the 3 men in the room. It used to be always 3 men in the room. They're making backroom doors. It wasn't helpful to New Yorkers. Don't hear much about that now. There's 3 Dems in the room. Very rarely do we hear about that. Lack of transparency. It's problematic. You see poll after poll in New York State saying New Yorkers are concerned really about 3 things. They're concerned about the cost of living, they're concerned about crime, and they're concerned about the migrant crisis. And as Leader Orr said, who of those 3 Dems, who are the 3 Dems in the room are worried about those issues, looking after New Yorkers who are worried about those issues? I haven't seen it. I haven't seen hardly the governor say anything about crime and trying to pull back some of these terrible criminal justice so-called reforms. Haven't heard anything from that. Cost of living, and that's really what we hear about, cost of living right now and the cost of housing. The Democrats' proposal, I guess, no transparency, but we hear that they're close to a deal. We don't know quite what the deal is, but if it's anything near what's being reported, We know it's a bad deal for New Yorkers. We know that this isn't going to help. Why would we possibly take the rules that we have in New York City, where they're having a housing crisis, where you're seeing rents triple, quadruple, because there isn't the supply of housing there? Why do we want to extend that to the rest of the state? Essentially take rate under the name good cause, which drives me, there's nothing good about this. It drives me crazy they call it good cause. It basically is rent control for the rest of the state, which is going to limit housing supply. Why would we want to possibly do that? So we're here today to raise these issues. We want to put some pressure on the governor. Governor, please, you represent us. Leader Orr said, you represent all of New York State, not just New York City. Please stand up to the legislative proposals, whether it's housing, whether it's crime, whether it's anything else to do with cost of living. Please, we're asking you, as one of those 3 Democrats in the room, please stand up for what's right and what New Yorkers need. So with that, I'm going to turn back to Senator Helmy, the chair or the ranker on the housing in the Senate.
Thank you, Leader Barkley. Thank you, Leader Orr. As we all know, there is a housing shortage in New York State. There have been a number of reports. The governor's talked about it herself. The shortage falls anywhere between 500,000 and 800,000 units that we need to bring online. So how do we create those units? That's the big question. One of the things that we know for certain is that good cause eviction is not going to inspire new building, right? It's not. It's not going to inspire property owners to create new rental units. And good cause is being pushed by the Democrats here in the Senate and the Assembly who support socialized housing. As the leader said, they do not support, they do not believe in private property ownership. So we all have to ask ourselves, why would a property owner continue to invest in New York State when good cause basically strips away their rights? It transfers property rights to the tenants. But there's another part that I wanted to talk about. Do you know what else is going to happen if good cause is enacted? Not only are we not going to get new building, but we're going to lose business opportunities. We're going to lose job opportunities. We've all received, and the governor has received, a number of letters from various organizations who are opposed to good cause eviction. That includes several chambers of commerce. One of the letters that we received from a chamber who represents more than 12,000 businesses in the state has said that it's reasonable to believe that virtually no builder will build new rental housing, effectively killing off any new housing starts and deepening the housing crisis in our state if good cause is enacted. And we all know without sufficient housing, larger businesses will move elsewhere. They're not going to continue to invest in New York State. And why would they? When they can move to a more business-friendly state, maybe one of the bordering states, or maybe to the southern states where many of our manufacturers have moved over the last several years. I wanted to share with you what happened in St. Paul, Minnesota, after that city enacted legislation very similar to what New York has proposed with good cause. Their building permits declined by 80%. Investors and builders halted development on housing projects, and that resulted in more job losses. Lost opportunities for New Yorkers will happen if we pass good cause eviction. Study after study, poll after poll shows that it's already tough to do business in our state. And I have to ask, how many more ways? Like, I wonder, do my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, do they stay awake at night trying to dream up opportunities? How could we screw more businesses? How can we make it more difficult for everyday New Yorkers, for the working class, for the middle class? It's out of control. I wanted to share with you, too, as I said, we received a number of letters from different organizations opposed to good cause eviction. This one is from the Black Clergy for Economic Empowerment. And this is what they had to say. It is crucial for communities of color to have opportunities for building generational wealth and for owning rental properties and apartment buildings. That plays a key role in this process. Across all 5 boroughs and throughout our diverse state, families from Black, Brown, Chinese, Indian, and Hispanic backgrounds, including many new Americans, are investing in property ownership. Good cause eviction, particularly the permanent lease renewals, would wreck the fragile economics of these long overdue ownership opportunities. And this is a quote. When it's our turn to own something and build something, they change the rules on us to protect their privilege. So today, I say, Governor Cuomo, Governor Hochul, I hope you are listening, and I hope you stand strong. We need you to stand strong for all New Yorkers, for our business communities, and oppose good cause eviction. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. You want to call?
Sure. Next, we have Mary Beth Walsh from the Assembly.
Thank you very much. So one of the great things about going last is a lot of things that I would have wanted to say have already been said, but I'll try to keep it brief. You know, everybody keeps referring to the housing crisis, but this has been going on for a long time. Since one-party rule in 2019, the worsening of the situation has largely been at the result of one party's creation. Rent stabilization has been around in New York City for years. It reduces turnover of apartments. It's 2 times as slow in turnover as market rate housing. We've got additional zoning rules and restrictions. We already have far more subsidized housing than any other state. The housing supply isn't keeping up with housing demand, even though we are losing population. As we know, we lead the nation in outmigration. We've lost 533,000 people since just 2020. We have to get a lot of things wrong to get where we are right now. And so this is a complicated topic. This isn't something that it can be fixed with one piece of legislation. But I was thinking about, you know, isn't the Hippocratic Oath, you know, first do no harm? I mean, I think part of the problem here is that when the state continues to meddle in what should be the free market, it just keeps getting worse and worse. So I think what needs to happen is to not get so, stop thinking about crisis, we have to immediately act, we have to enact bold policy to completely, just like when you're turning a ship around, right? You have to do it deliberately, you have to do it and understand that change is going to be made sometimes slowly, sometimes incrementally, and that there's nothing wrong with that. As legislators, sometimes that's better than trying to enact bold policy to say that you did and end up just making the situation worse. So there have been a number of counterproductive regulations that have been put into place. One, in 2019, we passed a law, I'm sure nobody here approved of it, that said that landlords couldn't get a price increase in their rent even if they made capital improvements, right? So that created a disincentive for property owners to take care of their buildings. We also know that we've had the Housing Stability and Tenant Protection Act. I mean, some of the previous things that have been done have applied only to New York City or counties that have opted in. And so, I mean, one of the things I would say is that if there is such a momentum to pass something like good cause, do it in New York City or do it in counties that opt in if you have to do it. I don't think you should do it at all. But if you're going to do it, have counties opt in if they want to. Don't create it. We always run into problems, I think, as a state legislature and as a government when we try to create one-size solutions for what's a really diverse state. We know that property owners, landlords, although it's such a feudal title, I always want to just say property owners because they're property owners. They're diverse. Some of them just have a duplex and they're just renting out the other half. You know, to some property owners have hundreds of units. We've got areas around the state that are very different. You know, we're not all New York City. We talk about that all the time. And as a member of Upstate, that's what I'm hearing from the constituents that have reached out to me. They don't want anything like good cause eviction to come in. I want to mention that during COVID, we basically eliminated any eviction. And think about how that clogged up our courts. Our housing courts are still a mess. They're still trying to come out of it. They're so backed up. Can you imagine if we passed something like good cause eviction where in order to justify any real increase, a landlord's going to have to go to court and try to defend that? Can you even imagine what that's going to do to our court system? It's going to be absolutely nightmarish, and we only have to think about what happened in the last few years to kind of know what it's going to look like. One thing I wanted to mention is that when the government tries to step in and do social policy, They're forgetting that property owners, this is not a vocation for them. This is not a vocation. This is a business. And if we, as a government, remove all the incentives and put up all the barriers, as has been said earlier, they're just going to fold up shop. I mean, many of them did during COVID. I mean, many of the property owners that called my office during COVID just said, I've got some tenants that I have to get rid of. They're destroying my property. I cannot have them here anymore. And they couldn't get rid of them. And I knew that there were some tweaks that were being made by the legislature to say that if you were breaking the law, or if you were if you were doing really bad things, you could still get rid of them, but you really couldn't get rid of them. A lot of them just left the business. They just sold off what they had, and they just folded up and they just said, we don't even want to be in this business anymore. And so part of the problem is that we don't have the housing stock, we don't have the property that we want, because we're not creating incentives in order for them to want to stay in it. We have to make this palatable. And honestly, one of the things that I heard from the governor the other day, and I heard it on the news, and I'll give you the quote. She said, we have to address their concerns, meaning the property owners' concerns, because otherwise I can't force the private sector to build. I can't make them go do it. Yes, I agree. That was the best thing I heard in the last few days from the governor. She's right about that. She can't make the private sector act. She found out last year during the budget that if you're just going to come in and say, thou shalt build this number of units, that there's a revolt over that, and that's not going to pass. And she threw up her hands last year and said, well, forget it then, you figure it out. And now we're trying to figure out housing again. And I would say she's got it right this year when she says something like that. You can't disrupt the market forces so much that nobody wants to participate, and you can't just mandate it all. So I would say good cause eviction shouldn't happen. I generally try to be reasonable when I do my work, and I generally like the idea of compromise, but when you take something that started at a 3% and you say, well, we're compromising now it's going to be 10% or 5% plus CPI or whatever the proposal is right now, as near as we can figure it out as it's being reported. I don't support it because I think fundamentally it's just a bad idea. And just compromising and softening what's a bad idea doesn't make it a good idea. So I will continue to stand with my colleagues and oppose this. I think that, as the Leader Barkley said, there are plenty of other things that really need to happen this year that aren't even being touched from what I understand. So I'm happy to join with everybody today. I'm sorry that the message is basically all the same. We're united in saying that as these budget negotiations hopefully complete, don't make a bad situation with housing worse by passing something like good cause. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. I want to thank all my colleagues for their comments. I know some of my colleagues have worked on this, but something that the Assemblywoman said and Senator Helming said, this is a complicated. If it was easy, we wouldn't be discussing it, right? That's kind of how it works here. The easy things get solved at other levels, or they get solved on their own, and it doesn't require contentious debate and hours of negotiation and thought. I mean, this is a complicated, nuanced issue, meaning housing. How do you spur new development? How do you spur new housing being constructed? But what I do know is that people who build housing, let's take a home builder up in Western New York. You know what they like to do? They like to build houses because that's how they make money. If they're not building houses, there's a reason. One of the reasons could be building housing is very expensive in the state of New York. And they're only going to build so many units that they think they're going to actually sell and make money, because it still is not a crime, in spite of some of my colleagues' attempts. It is not a crime to make money. And home builders and developers should be able to make money on housing. I need to say that because I think that we are getting to a weird point where I don't think some people really believe that you should be able to make money on housing. Housing is not the First Amendment. The Assemblywoman talked about, she said, we basically, we're not a charity. This is not a charity. You're not, if you're a property owner, you're not in the charitable business. You're in the money-making business. This is a money-making enterprise, and that should be okay. Because you're providing a roof, making money. It's no different than someone who runs a restaurant. You feed people, not for nothing. It's not because you're not feeding you're not Catholic Charities. You're feeding people. That's your business model. You own that restaurant. If someone shows up at the door and says, I'm hungry, I want a meal, they don't have a right to a free meal. There's a different thing for that. This, if you own apartment units or you build homes, you have the right to make a profit by selling people homes and renting people apartments. And when that lease is over, you have the right to put that apartment back online. My colleagues, in some cases, don't think so. But the quote that the Assemblywoman mentioned, where the governor said, she's right, she can't make the private sector do anything. But what they're doing is incentivizing the private sector to do the opposite of what needs to be done. They're going to make it more expensive, more costly to build homes, or in some cases, doing nothing for most of the state. And for landlords in New York City and across the state of New York, they're going to make it an incentive to not own properties and rent properties in the state of New York. 80% decline in building permits. We're going to collapse property values. That is what this is going to do. Whatever the intentions may be, I've gotten to the point, I don't care what intentions. I don't care about intentions. I care about results. Government is filled with people who have great intentions and terrible results. Terrible results. So don't tell me about your intentions, what you're trying to do, and we got to stop pitting tenants with property owners. It's the same, we're trying to do the same thing. Property owners like tenants. You want to know why? That's how they make money. They don't want empty units. That doesn't do anybody any good. But my colleagues in the Democratic Conference, we've gotten to this point where they're going to pit. Property owners are evil. Property owners are exploitative. And so we're going to make sure they can't increase their rents, no matter how much money they put in. We're going to make sure they can't evict somebody, regardless of non-payment. We're going to make it so impossible because you want to know why? Because they're bad people. That is the message. That is the message that we collectively have sent to property owners in New York State. And we've emboldened and we've fanned the flames for tenants that the reason you're having a hard time making your rent or the reason you can't find a unit is because these evil property owners. And that's just, that is disappointing, I guess, as an elected leader that we put that forward, because that is not the case. We're lying to those people. What we should be doing is reminding them that the way we get you more units, the way we get you more access to affordable housing is to incentivize construction, work with property owners who put these units online and provide a roof over your head. Yes, for an amount of money. That's how it works, because someone built it. Someone pays the heat. Someone is responsible if something goes wrong. And it's not the tenant. It's the property owner. And that model has worked and provided housing for people in this state and across the country for, I don't know, 100 years, 200 years, whatever it is, a long time. And now all of a sudden, we're in this revolutionary moment where we got to overturn this whole system, just like we've done with other things in this state, which I won't get into today because we don't, well, I guess we do have the time, but you don't want to be here for the whole time. So, you know, that's, you know, I want to thank my colleagues for being here. I want to thank Senator Helming and Assemblywoman Mary Beth Walsh, who've, you know, spent time really thinking about these issues, specifically in depth. Our conference has put together a housing package, I think just a week ago or 2 weeks ago, and I stand by that housing package. And I know Senator Helming and Senator Martins and Senator Borrello, Senator Matera, all who spoke at that press conference, all stand by that, and our conference does. And we, again, call on the governor. There is no final deal until it's final. The governor needs to remember the rest of New York State, and she needs to remember that quote, and she needs to remember that she is the governor for the whole state, and she needs to spur development and growth and construction across the state. And she needs to care about homeowners and would-be homeowners across the state, because if we lose that piece, I'm telling you right now, if that becomes harder and harder and homeownership is further and further out of reach, that is a chipping away of the American dream, and it will only serve to hurt New York State and chase more people out. So with that, we'll take on, if there's any on topics, And then we'll go to, once we've exhausted those, we will go to off-topic or general budget questions.
Would you feel the same way if the deal comes out and it's an opt-in on a good cause, meaning no municipality that doesn't approve it would have it?
Would I feel the same way? Would I be less annoyed? Yeah. Would I support it? Probably not. Because I think you'll have counties, sadly, you know, I'm not going to pick on anybody specifically, but you'll definitely have counties that will opt in. And for those areas, all the negative impacts will be there. Listen, now it depends on what is in the final deal, right? One of my big objections is the automatic lease renewals. I think that is just, and that really is good cause, right? That's, when you boil it down, good cause is automatic lease renewal. No one ever is tossed out of their apartment. To get them out of their apartment or to increase above a certain amount, no matter how much you put in, you got to go to court. That is just, you know, at the same time that New York is becoming a national joke on squatters, where someone can get in your house or be in your house for 30 days and they have a right to your home. This is nuts. I look at this as almost the same fundamental DNA strand. The idea that someone who owns a place, they have the right to it. No one else does. No one else does. Housing is not free speech. It's not the right to privacy. It isn't the Second Amendment. It is not an esoteric thing that is given to you by God or by protected by the Constitution. It is someone built it, constructed it, owns it, and if you want to pay them a certain amount of money to stay there, whatever the market will bear, and we have to support that system, and there's things we can do, whether it's incentives, tax credits, lowering the cost of construction. There's things we can do to spur the private sector. You can add to that, yes.
So I just wanted to add my personal thoughts on if there's an opt-in. I think that is a negative, and here's the reason why: uncertainty. That's what we hear from business owners. That's what we hear from property owners. They're still not going to know. Should they continue to invest in New York State? Will their county opt in? Will they opt out? This uncertainty has created so many problems on so many levels. So it's nothing that I would support.
I was just saying, I think it also adds uncertainty with banks. We talked about the financial institutions, lending institutions, which are part of this whole equation. They hate uncertainty. And even the fact that we're talking about this is reason for them to start changing their lending practices in the state of New York.
So, and just to add to some of my colleagues' comments, this isn't theoretical, by the way. We already have the system in New York City. It's not working. They passed apparently a good cause law in St. Paul's, Minnesota. After they did that, building permits were down 80%. So we have examples of how bad this policy is. So whether we mandate it or we let people opt in, either way, the policy is bad and we shouldn't support it.
Yes, I'm sorry. I did want to ask you about there's legislation that Senator Liu and Assemblymember Kim are introducing that would define what a squatter is, and really make sure to, I guess, distinguish that they are not legal tenants. Do you think does that satisfy any of the concerns or the issues you think that maybe the good cause would add to the squatting issue?
So I don't want to conflate the actual policy, meaning we're talking about a housing deal that none of us have seen, actually, right? So I'm not familiar with Senator Liu's bill, okay, to be fair. I think it's interesting that we have to define what a squatter is, because I always thought we knew. In fact, I thought it was pretty well understood, even under law, what a squatter was. I'll make it simple. It's someone who doesn't live in your home. It's someone who has no right to be there. It's someone, if you don't have the deed, if you don't have the title, if you don't have any kind, you don't belong there. And the cops should be able to remove you at that moment, period, full stop. And yet we've seen videos. I saw a woman in Queens who owned the home who was arrested because she changed the locks. I mean, this is real simple. We can just enforce laws that we have. Obviously, the fact that we have to define a squatter, I think, belies a larger problem. I would look at the bill, obviously, before casting judgment on his legislation or their legislation. But I think that I brought up the squatter piece in the context of this conversation, really because I think it goes to the idea that there are many members of elected government in these buildings, in these halls, no one up here, but somewhere floating around here, who believe that, well, if you're there, you're a human, and we don't want to send you out onto the street, and so you have a right to that place. You have a right to this home because you're there for 30 days or whatever it is. To me, that is unbelievable, and I think most New Yorkers would find it unbelievable. And most New Yorkers probably never even knew that these weird housing laws even existed, that if somebody got into my home for 30 days, or if they had a lease and it expired and they didn't pay, and they were there for 30 days or more, I had to take them to court to get them out. The homeowner, the property owner is the homeowner, is the property owner. Anyone else is a tenant, and if they don't have a lease currently, or they haven't paid, or they've broken that lease, or they never had one to begin with, and that person wants them gone, they should be gone. What they do after that is up to them. It's on them. This is not a hard concept, but this idea that, if you can just get into someone's house for 30 days, you have the right to stay there and take the homeowner to court is really is a joke, except for the fact that it's happening and it's very serious. So I would look at any law that dealt with that. Senator Matera has a bill in our conference dealing with squatters. He had a member in his local union who went into a house to do fix a leaky pipe. He had no knowledge that there was anyone in the house. There was a squatter in the house who attacked him with a baseball bat. And this individual is now in a hospital. That's a real story. Now, you could say, well, that doesn't happen most of the time. It happened. A squatter attacked this individual. So it's just unbelievable. So he has a bill. I would much more be willing to support that bill. But I'll look at any bill that attempts to deal with this issue. But it's sad that we actually have to write legislation to address this issue because other states, it just isn't an issue in those other states. And that's I think a problem here in New York.
Do you think it should be dealt with in the budget or part of the housing package?
Should it be? Yeah, any ways we can deal with squatters, we deal with squatters. Just to add on a little bit of my colleague's comments, I actually saw a business that's been established to out-squat the squatters. So they wait outside the house. When the squatter leaves, they get in the house and squat to keep the squatter out. I mean, that's how ridiculous this whole circumstance has become. So listen, most tenants, I think, are good people. They want to pay rent. They want to live in a good place to live. They want to provide for their families. The problem is we've tilted the scales so badly towards the tenants away from the property owners that you end up with these situations with squatters, which are kind of the extreme of one side. Good cause is just going to exacerbate that problem going forward. It's not as bad as squatting, obviously, but it does provide people with tenancy for life, and that's going to be a problem for any landlord, simply put.
How would you compare the level of urgency you see from your colleagues on the other side of the aisle in this budget season compared to maybe the last couple?
Well, I guess I would need to see a sense of urgency at all, right? Which I don't see one. I really don't. I see no sense of urgency. The leader mentioned this. This is my 10th year here. I've been a part of many budgets. We were in the majority under different governors, obviously. And I always remembered, and we've commented on this actually collectively among some of the members who are here, how as you got close to April 1st, you could feel that you were getting to the deadline. You could feel like, oh, we got to do something, something's got to happen. The previous governor made an on-time budget. Now, of course, there were years where, on time was April 5th, but he made the April 1st deadline mean something. Now, I have many disagreements with the previous governor, but I think the governor, whoever it is, they're the ones that have to really drive that. Look, I serve in the legislature, I'm very proud to. But you have 63 senators and 150 members of the assembly. If it was left up to us, we'd get the budget done like in September, right? Because you have all those people, all those issues. You need somebody who is driving and saying, this deadline means something, and if we miss that deadline, there's gonna be a consequence. There's gonna be prices to pay. I'm not just gonna let it go by. There's no sense of urgency. There's none. This year might be the worst. Last year, I thought there was a lack of urgency. We went late. And I know there was some contentious issues, but every budget there's contentious issues. At some point, someone's got to say, we're not leaving here. We're not going to keep going home. We're not going to go back. We're just going to stay here and get it done. Now, do I want to just sit here and no? But that's what our job is to get an on-time budget. There are people in the state, school districts, municipalities, they don't had the luxury of just blowing by their deadline and we'll get it done when we get it done. So I just don't see a sense of urgency, and I put that mostly, I mean, I reserve a lot of criticism for my colleagues across the aisle, but I put that mostly on the governor. I think the governor is the one who has to drive that sense of urgency. April 1 is the deadline. We're going to have an on-time budget, or we're going to have a close to an on-time budget, and if we're not, then there's going to be a consequence. That's what happens in business. That's what happens in, I mean, hell, it happens in not-for-profits, for God's sakes, right? There's accountability. Deadlines mean something. Here, you know, like the leader said, we have an extended budget. I mean, what the heck is that? I mean, I don't even know what that is. You know, we have an extender. It's a stopgap measure because we couldn't get to a new spending plan. A delayed budget. I mean, you know, these words, I guess, you know, words, they're always, you know, it's nice to be creative, and we all live in a world where sometimes we have to be creative with words, but we all know what that means. It's a late budget. We have a late budget for the second year in a row. And the amazing thing is, it's all one party. When it was Republican Senate, Democratic Assembly, and sometimes Republican or Democratic governor, you know, sometimes you might understand why there was some real contention in that room in the negotiations, because you had different parties, different philosophies sometimes. It's all one party. You would think that if they could do one thing with one party control, it would be to get an on-time budget. And in fact, that has been the opposite. The last 2 years have been late budgets, and I don't know, you know, maybe next week, maybe. I certainly can't see us going home for the recess without a budget. I think that would be a slap in the face to the voters in New York. And I already told our conference, prepare to be here all next week. We shouldn't leave, and I don't think we will leave until there's a budget, but that's not obviously my call. But again, I think the governor has to really start driving that this is unacceptable to just get it done when we get it done, like an eventual budget.
Leader, some Democrats have said that good cause is part, an element, or an effort to improve tenant protections in the state. Do you think there are enough tenant protections, or that there's more the state could be doing?
I think it is almost unfathomable to me. Now, look, I never pretend that I know every issue across the state as well as I would like. And in my district, tenants make up a much smaller portion than, let's say, someone who represents Queens or Brooklyn. But I think New York State has some of the strongest tenant protections, I would argue, probably in the country. I bet if you looked at 50 other states, 49 other states, we have some of the strongest tenant protections in America. The issue isn't tenant protections. The issue is cost. New York City is a very expensive place to live. We talk about affordability. What we should be talking about, instead of just saying we're going to give you, you know, automatic lease renewals and we're going to prevent your rents from going up, what we should be trying to figure out is, A, like we talked about, how do we incentivize more housing stock will result in more, obviously more houses, which will decrease the value because you will have more units online. The more demand for a scarcer resource results in increased prices. This is not, you don't need an MBA in Harvard economics to know this stuff. And I say that not for you, but for my colleagues across the aisle. This is very simple economics, law of supply and demand. Right now, we have an increasing demand for an increasingly limited supply in the city, and I would argue across the state. And so we need to address that. That's the first thing. The other thing we should talk about is how do we keep more good-paying jobs in the state of New York, in the city, in the state? Because if people are earning good incomes, then they will pay their rent, and they won't be worried about being thrown out. But this notion that we have to, you know, we feed into this, we have to keep protecting tenants. There's all these groups that come down here. I don't even know if they are tenants or if they're just paid to come down here and stand in the $1 million staircase with a sign, whether they even know the issue. But they keep coming down here. We need more tenant protections. What they really want, most of these folks, they want publicly owned housing. They want NYCHA for the state of New York, right? Because that's the only other solution. If there's not a private landlord or property owner, then there's a public property owner. Someone has to own it if it's not the tenant, and that means the state of New York, the city of New York. I would tell you, go find someone who lives in a NYCHA unit and ask them if they think NYCHA is a good property owner. They're probably the worst one in the state of New York, and we want to turn that loose on the whole state. To what the leader said, we're taking solutions that already have failed or been met with dismal results, and we want to extrapolate that to the entire state. So I don't think we need to do anything more for tenant protection. I think tenants are protected. I'm always willing to, but there's courts, there's all kinds of mechanisms for tenants to be protected. What we're really talking about, and I think what tenants really are, is cost and affordability, and this deal will not do anything to help with that.
Yeah, just very simply. The tenants that have the biggest complaints are either in the public housing or the rent control housing, because no one has the money to upgrade those things. So those are the talk about tenant rights, the ones that they're trying to mimic, those are the people that need more rights because they aren't getting the services they need now.
That's a good.
Thanks, guys.